You are listening to Mining Stock Education, where you'll learn from the top leaders in the natural resource sector and uncover quality mining investment opportunities.
I found a 5 million ounce along with my team in Africa. We found a significant mineralization in Mexico. But I'm really excited to go from the 5 to the plus 10 million ounce realm.
Welcome back to Mining Stock Education. I'm your host, Bill Powers. And in today's show, we're getting an update from Eminent Gold Corp. Website is eminentgoldcorp.com. They're a show sponsor. I also finance this company at 70 cents Canadian as well as 45 cents Canadian this year. Shares have been trading in that 45 cent to 50 cent range. Actually have been holding up pretty well for an exploration company considering the market. So joining me today for an update is the CEO and director, Paul Sun, as well as Dan McCoy. He's the chief geologist and he's also a director. So gentlemen, welcome on to the show. Paul, I understand that you're doing some geophysics at your Round Mountain Analogue project. Round Mountain is 20 plus million ounces in Nevada, and this project is the Spanish Moon project. Could you please give us an update of what's going on here?
Absolutely. Thanks very much, Bill, for having us on. Appreciate it, as always. And as you mentioned, yes, as a reminder to your audience, we do have 4 projects in our portfolio. Spanish Moon is one of them. We are the first as a company to consolidate this area as a district. And if you kind of imagine where Spanish Moon is located, looking at Nevada, we're just south of center, if you will. And our project, Spanish Moon, has multiple mineralization types. We have the past producing silver mine, Barcelona mine, which has produced over 200,000 ounces of silver, high-grade silver, I'll add. We have past historical drill intercepts, gold intercepts at our Meadow Canyon. And then very recently, we've, as analogy to hot springs, which has never been explored before, we've have this Meadow Canyon target, which really is in the northeast area of our property boundary, and we call it an analog to Kinross's 23 million ounce Round Mountain, as it sits on the edge of the Round Mountain Pluton. And Round Mountain's on one side, and just 13 kilometers away on the other side is Meadow Canyon. So if we go to the next slide, you can see here, or to those viewers, I'll try to explain. We basically have plutons and calderas, which create a lot of heat and pressure. And along the edges, as where the margins of these calderas and plutons is where these mineralizations or mineralizing events occur. And again, we have the Round Mountain on one side, and then on the other side, we have Meadow Canyon. Interestingly enough, structurally, there's also what we call a pull-apart basin, which is directly analogous to Round Mountain and what we think is at Meadow Canyon, even though there's other deposits, multiple gold deposits in 8-kilometer intervals around this Round Mountain Pluton. So we think ours certainly can hold the size, at least at this point, of a Round Mountain. And with that, maybe just to help your listeners understand how and why these mineralization events are so important, I'll pass it to our Chief Geo, Dan McCoy, to give you a quick one-on-one teach-in on calderas.
Thanks, Paul. There's pretty much nothing I like talking about more than calderas, so, but I'll try to keep it brief. Whereas a lot of geologic processes happen very slow over millions of years, calderas are not that kind of thing. They're very dramatic and abrupt things. And as any of the listeners out there might have visited either Yellowstone or Crater Lake, this is essentially the phenomena. Those were more recent occurrences than what we're looking at. But essentially what happens is you have a big magma chamber that's feeding volcanoes, right? And it might be feeding relatively small volcanoes. And by small volcanoes, we're talking about Mount Rainier and so forth. But what calderas form when you have a massive volcano. It's the massive volcano that preceded Yellowstone, the massive volcano that preceded Crater Lake. And what happens is after one of these huge eruptions, which none of us in the U.S. have ever seen in our lifetime, like Mount St. Helens was basically a little firecracker compared to these kind of eruptions. So when these eruptions happen, essentially the magma chamber empties, or at least partially empties. And when that happens, you have a collapse. So if you look in figure 1, you've got your, kind of relatively small volcanoes happen. Then you have a massive eruption. And the massive eruption leads to a collapse. And it's this collapse that gives us the opportunity to form these huge gold deposits like we see at Round Mountain, for example. So when you have this huge collapse, now you still got lots of heat happening, lots of water circulating. You still have magma down there heating up the whole situation. So it's a perfect environment to form gold deposits because as we talk about in our Hot Springs Range project, what you need to bring tens of million ounces of gold to the surface is these large crustal cracks. And that's what you get when you have these gigantic eruptions and collapses. The other thing you need is water. So you have steam being extruded into these cracks, and then you have water forming in the crater lakes. And, anybody who's been to the pools at Yellowstone and so forth, you could see all this bubbling, these geysers, this active geothermal environment. And that's what gives us big gold deposits. Paul was asking me, well, why don't we have them at Yellowstone? And I'm like, we do. It's just, it's too young. It needs to cool off and erode a little bit. And I'm betting that Yellowstone probably has tens of, not hundreds of millions of ounces forming right now below it. And so the fortunate thing for us at Round Mountain and at Meadow Canyon is that things are eroded to like a perfect setting, right? At Round Mountain, one of the only problems I think for this kind of exploration that really impacts us as well is you also have like sediments that form on top. So you get like little lake sediments and stuff. You need those to either erode off or you need to find some way to see through them so that you can see where these systems really lay. And that's where we're at with Meadow Canyon. That's why we're doing geophysics. So moving on from the how and why, now we're going to look at where is it and how do we find it. And so we'll start out by looking at Round Mountain. And so we think we're in a really analogous situation to that. This is a little bit overly complicated diagram. The important structure to look at is right here. So this caldera structural margin, if we go back just one, that's this. So we're looking at the difference between the volcanics, these intracaldera volcanics, and in the case of Round Mountain and Meadow Canyon, these Paleozoic sediments. And so this gives you a really good combination of things. You've got this really deep-seated structure. You've got some good chemical differences between these host rocks. It's really a perfect situation, which is why there's 23 million ounces there. And so if you go from looking at Round Mountain, now one of the things before we move on to this that I think is interesting to look at, so you can see up here, all of this in the pit above, it's all either recent sediments or old sediments. And that's what I'm saying. That's the difficult thing about exploring for these things is they're often quite covered. Round Mountain was fortunate that it was discovered at the surface, but it was only a very small occurrence that made it to the surface. And most of the deposit was discovered by drilling afterwards, drilling through these overlying sediments, right? The difference between that and our case is, we have the same structural margin, but we don't actually see very much of mineralization coming up. We've got a few good, up to 200 ppb gold anomalies in soils, but most of it is covered with these same sediments that were overlying Round Mountain. We haven't seen, like Round Mountain, we don't have a hill where you can see the mineralization coming to the surface. And that's why we need to use the geophysics to tell us where these high conductivity areas are. The high conductivity areas being where we're expecting to find this mineralization.
And Bill, I just wanted to point out there that we have these side-by-side pictures here, and for those that may not see it, what we're really trying to show here is from a scale perspective, the Meadow Canyon target is also analogous in size, not just in formation, but also if you look at the scale of Round Mountain and it's a few kilometers across, it's the same situation on the Meadow Canyon side. So just for those,
right. And you can see that once again in when you look at the scale and the cross section as well. At Round Mountain. So this is 300 meters here. It's a very large, wide deposit in cross section. So what we're looking at here is, once again, we have both these caldera bounding structures that are so important, as we pointed out in our schematic diagram. And then you have all this mineralization that comes up in these structures and in subsidiary structures that are right next to it. And that gives you this beautiful target. So you've got these disseminated gold deposits. You also have some high-grade veins. When people think of disseminated ore deposits like Round Mountain, 23 million ounces, there's a lot of high-grade in there too. And we're expecting that we'll find the same thing at Meadow Canyon. So this is what the geophysics is going to do for us. You can see at Round Mountain, they very, very fortunately were able to find below these lake sediments and these other sediments that obscure the mineralization. They were able to find a little bit to get them going. We found some soils that excite us, but what we need to do is we need to run the geophysics, because once we run the geophysics, it's going to show us where these feeder zones are, where the rock has been altered and destroyed by these mineralizing fluids, which is going to give you a high electrical conductivity anomaly. So that's where we're at right now. It's very exciting, and we're expecting to have results by the end of the year on this.
And then from there, you apply for drill permits after you refine the targets?
We actually, because we're looking for such big targets, we've expedited that process. So we've actually already placed drill holes in this area and are actively permitting them right now. The Forest Service has been very reasonable and timely to work with in the recent past. And so we're in the process of doing the studies that we need to do to permit those holes. But because that's the advantage of looking for a 23 million ounce deposit. The advantage of looking for such a large deposit is you're going to hit it. You don't have to have your holes specifically placed in a specific area. So we actually started permitting those holes even before we started the geophysics, so that we can, and in the process of doing the studies, we'll quickly eliminate anything barrier that might be in the way to us expanding that drill program in the future. Kinross, on the other side of us, has recently picked up ground closer to us. That's also in the Forest Service, and they're going through the same process with the same people. And so,
is that a result of what you're putting out publicly about your target here? Did that spur Kinross on to acquire land closer to where you are in light of the work you're doing here?
It very well could have. It's hard to say. I can't really exactly predict why they would do it, but I know that Kinross, because and it's no secret. I mean, there's no information that isn't widely available that I'm talking about here. But obviously, the Kinross's project in Russia has been shut down. This is really a big money making project for them, and so they're devoting a lot more resources to doing their own exploration, both on the property that they have and outside of that property. So,
Dan, when you're talking about this, I sense a high level of confidence of probability that you're going to be successful. And I want to share with you an email I got from a listener could have been 3.5 years ago after I interviewed a CEO for an exploration company. And he said, Bill, the one issue I had with your guest was that he talked about the deposit as if he's already found it when he hasn't even put a drill hole in yet. So
Right.
if somebody were to say that to you, how would you respond?
Obviously, that's the risk reward ratio that we get in this business. We don't invest in exploration companies to get a 10% increase in our value. We're looking for 1,000% increase in our value. And so obviously, there's no guarantees in this. It's just what you do is you look for as many pieces of evidence that overlap. So in this case, the pieces of evidence that overlap are caldera margin, some soil anomalies, the structural setting for it, which is well known and can be mapped at the surface. And one of the things that we share with Round Mountain is not only is there a big structure through there, but there's several structures. So we're getting these potentially structural situation that gives us a lot of pathways for fluids to travel. So I would say each one of those is kind of it's kind of like an argument in court. Every time you add some supporting evidence, you increase the likelihood that there's something there, but you don't know until you drill, obviously.
And so you came out of retirement for this project too. So the supporting evidence and the analog you're working with was enticing enough to get you out of retirement.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm extremely motivated to find plus million ounce deposits, and I found a 5 million ounce along with my team in Africa. We found a significant mineralization in Mexico. But I'm really excited to go from the 5 to the plus 10 million ounce realm.
And plus 10 million ounce in Nevada, which is, really America's best jurisdiction. How many plus 10 million ounces have we seen discovered in Nevada in the last year? It's only been one, right? If I recall. Yeah.
There hasn't been a lot. It doesn't happen very often. And that's why you work your whole life as a geologist and increase your knowledge base and try to get with the best people that you can in order to get into that rarefied category. A lot of geologists make no discoveries. And so, that's basically what I live for and what I dream about is getting into that 10 million ounce category. And so we're looking for the kinds of situations that can get us there. And so some of these things are, especially in Nevada, are going to be early stage. And so you have to stack the evidence up one on top of another until you really feel like, okay, everything is really lining up here. And that's when you put your drill holes down.
So, Paul, you have 2 plus 20 million ounce targets. You also have the Hot Springs Range project, which is 20 plus million ounces. Actually, a 40 million ounce Getchell trend analog is how you've described it. And then you have 2 smaller projects as well in the multi-million ounce, but not the 20 million ounce targeting. So maybe talk us through your second big swing and how are you mitigating the risk? Because you're still an early stage exploration company. The market isn't so hot right now. What is your approach to the Hot Springs Range project?
Sure. Yeah. So Hot Springs was basically brought to us by a married couple that both did their PhD dissertations in Nevada on mineralization types, on carlin-style mineralization, which is exactly the Hot Springs Range setting. It's just on the other side of the 42 million ounce Getchell trend. It's the intersection of the Meadow Mountain and the 42 million ounce Getchell trend. And kind of, thematically, Eminent is taking a fresh perspective and using new concepts for exploration. And Dan just mentioned, there hasn't been a big discovery in Nevada for a while, and a lot of people always argue, there's a lot of gold in Nevada, but maybe it's already been found, and that's not true because there's a lot of stuff that you see on surface, but the stuff that you don't see on surface is there. You just have to work harder to find it and come up with a thesis. And that's exactly what Justin and Ajit Milliard did. During their PhD thesis, they staked land on the other side of this trend. And exactly what Dan said, systematically, methodically, ticked every box there was to build the confidence that, now we're gonna go drill it. So the soils, the geochem, the geophysics, everything was there, and similar. It's a blind target, so you don't really see it, which is exactly what we just talked about at Meadow Canyon. So certainly there is a big swing. There is risk in that, but we've built our portfolio. There's 4 projects in total. So as you mentioned, we have, aside from Hot Springs Range and Spanish Moon, which are the big over 10 million ounce swings, we have Weepah, which is in the Walker Lane trend. We also have Gilbert South, also in the Walker Lane trend. It's a high-grade bonanza vein system. There you see surface expression. So again, those two are further advanced in terms of exploration. So there is, confidence there because there has been, in some cases, past drilling or production. So, so theoretically, there is higher confidence, or we call it low hanging fruit, in terms of our portfolio to diversify, the big swings on each side. But also, to be clear, what we are looking for is multi-million ounce deposits. So even at Weepah or Gilbert South, we are looking for multi-million ounce deposits. That's not to say they're 10 million ounces, but we'd like them to be at least kind of 2 or 3 million ounces, or we're not really interested in kind of holding on to that property. So that's how we think about mitigating the risk. 3 of the 4 are ready to drill. We can drill them in parallel, or we can drill them in serial. We have quite a bit of flexibility, and of course we are in Nevada, so we can drive to all the properties. Infrastructure is fantastic. Resources are there. So we couldn't be in a better place.
And what would be the next steps, Paul? You're waiting on the geophysics from Spanish Moon, but what else is the company doing to move these projects forward?
Yeah. So as Dan mentioned, geophysics hopefully come in kind of mid to late December. Hot Springs, we are effectively drill ready. We're permitted there. We can do some ongoing road work at Weepah and Gilbert South, but 3, are pretty much ready to go. And on Spanish Moon, we'll continue with that plan of operations that Dan talked about. But again, we already have our drill hole positioning there. So yeah, we, I think as you mentioned at the outset, capital markets haven't been the strongest. So we want to be careful. We've been head down this year, doing less expensive work that gets us ready, gives us that confidence, as opposed to, putting a drill hole in where, even if we find something amazing, the market might not reward us for it. That's kind of the market that we're in. So we're being careful on the timing of things, but certainly we are anxious to drill, and, I think look forward to drilling in early 2023.
So what you're describing is kind of the perspective I saw someone put on Twitter, an intelligent person who understands the exploration market on Twitter, where they said, you can't just do nothing in this market if you're going to have an exploration company. You have to at least prime the company so that when the market turns, you're ready to go. Would that be what you're saying?
Absolutely. We're up to date on all our technical reports, our 43-101s on all our projects, our title opinions. So we've done all the work. So we're basically, ready to go 100%.
And Dan, you've gone through the cyclicality of the mining sector. Any comments you have on how you're running the company through where we're at right now?
When I finished my dissertation, one of my committee members asked me in my defense in 2000, how do you feel about studying the formation of gold deposits when no one will ever want gold again? And so at any rate, of course, by 2011, they were eating their words, and I was pretty happy. So seen this happen multiple times, and that's what with the younger geologists, part of my job this year is just to say, hey, it's turned around before and it will turn around again. And then you're going to be wishing you had less work to do.
That's a great point. And I had a friend tell me yesterday, he said, Bill, I was at a conference in Toronto recently, and someone came up to me and they said, gold is dead. And he said that was one of the most bullish signs I've had for gold in a while.
It is. Capitulation. That you love it when that happens.
Yeah. Any commentary on that, Paul? Or
yeah, no, I mean, we always, I'm a past, banker, before this company, and we make those jokes all the time. When you're in when you're in a cab and the taxi driver gives you a stock tip to buy a company, that's the time to sell the company or short it or whatever, because it's at that point where it's turned. And it's the same thing with gold. When people are saying that, gold's dead, which in my experience, I don't think they're saying, but that is definitely a bullish signal in my mind. And certainly what's happening with the Fed, and everyone, has an opinion, but, I think gold is going to have legs. And, obviously we're a gold exploration company, so, we will move with the gold price, but really what we're building here is a portfolio for discovery success. And, as long as there's senior companies, producing gold, and the mandate is for them to produce gold and replace the reserves, that's, I think, where we're going to create the value. It's not about, trading with the gold price. It's about creating value, finding the next discovery in Nevada that's going to create value for our shareholders.
And Paul, one more thing before you go. As I mentioned, I helped finance the company at 70 cents, then again at 45 cents. You didn't even see a 50% decline when many other exploration stocks saw a 90% decline. Maybe give your commentary on that.
Yeah, well, first off, Bill, thanks very much for continuing to be a supportive shareholder. We really appreciate it. All our shareholders, we're aligned with you. Over 50% of the company is owned by insiders and technical personnel. So, we're all aligned to make that discovery. We raised just under $1.4 million in the late summer, and we're very careful with our cash, and I think it is a testament to our shareholders. It has been a pretty rough market out there. We're still trading above issue price, and things are holding in there because I think, as I said, people are in this thing to see it to potential discovery. So. We're very blessed to have the shareholders that we have, and we're working hard for everybody.
And Dan, any final thoughts as we conclude?
I would just concur with what Paul said. I think that geologists tend to be naturally optimistic people, at least in the mineral sector business. But as both of you mentioned, we've seen these ups and downs, and I think the thing is, it's just like riding waves. You do what you do. And you do what you do every day, and then you wait for things to turn, and that's when it all happens. Excellent. And so you just have to be patient sometimes, and be willing to invest in things when everyone else thinks, quote unquote, they're dead.
That's right. Well, I'm going to link to in the show notes, especially if you're listening in an audio form only. There's a lot of educational value as Dan talked through some of the images that we shared today. You can learn about these type of deposits as well as the potential investment value of what we discussed. So I'm going to link to the PowerPoint in the show notes, as well as the company has put out some kind of field work videos describing their projects with boots on site. And I'll link to the recent videos the company has put out as well. Gentlemen, really appreciate you coming on the show today, and thank you for providing this update.
Thanks so much, Bill, as always.
Thank you, Bill. Always a pleasure.